I stared at the screen, waiting for someone, anyone, to say it was a joke. But all I saw were 3 little dots as my sister typed, then stopped. No apology. No defense. Just silence. And that silence told me everything. In that instant, the air in my office felt heavy. All the years of late-night payments, tuition transfers, and mortgage checks flashed before me, every dollar I'd sent to keep them comfortable. And suddenly, I understood. They didn't cut me off because I failed them. They cut me off because I finally stopped being useful. Because that message wasn't just rejection. It was liberation disguised as cruelty. But before that moment, I'd spent years trapped in a cycle of emotional debt, one they built so carefully I didn't even notice I was drowning in it. When I first got promoted at work, my mom threw a small dinner. I thought it was to celebrate me. But halfway through dessert, she said, "Your father's been struggling with the mortgage payment. Maybe you can take over for a few months, just until we catch up." A few months turned into years. Then came Lily, my baby sister, the golden one. My parents adored her. Every time I questioned how much I was giving, my dad would say, "Don't make your sister suffer for our mistakes." So I covered her tuition, her books, even her spring break trip to Cabo. Because I didn't want to be the selfish one. They knew exactly how to play me. It wasn't always about money, though. It was about control. Every decision I made, where I lived, who I dated, how I spent my weekends, was weighed against their judgment. When I bought my own condo, my mom said, "It's cute. Temporary, right? You'll move back once you're married." When I turned down a family gathering because of work, my dad texted, "You've changed. Money's made you cold." It worked every time. The guilt. The obligation. I'd end up transferring another check or driving across town just to keep the peace. Then, last Christmas, things started to crack. I had booked a family trip, paid in full. Flights, hotel, everything. But 2 days before departure, Lily backed out, claiming she needed the money for her startup. My parents followed suit, saying they couldn't leave her behind. So I spent Christmas alone in a beachfront villa I'd paid for, watching my family post photos from a spontaneous ski trip online. That was the first time I truly felt it, not sadness, but humiliation. Like I was an outsider funding their happiness. I should have confronted them then, but I didn't. Because that's what they counted on. They knew I'd always choose peace over conflict. But then came the text. The one that said I was no longer part of the family. At first, I thought maybe Lily had sent it by mistake. She'd been distant lately, avoiding my calls. But when I checked the group chat again, I saw her reaction, a heart emoji under my mom's message. That's when something inside me broke. Not from pain, but from clarity. I opened my old spreadsheets, the ones I'd used to track my budget, and started adding everything up. Mortgage payments, insurance, tuition, repairs. Every favor I'd ever done. Line by line, the truth appeared before me. I had spent over $312,000 on people who now claimed I didn't belong to them. And somehow, seeing it written out like that made it real. This wasn't family. This was a transaction. And I'd been the only one paying. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call them. I just sat there with my laptop glowing in the dark, realizing I had built their comfort, and erased my own. So when the morning came, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt awake. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you understand what they took from you, it's only a matter of time before you decide to take it back. The drive home felt endless, headlights stretching across the dark like ghosts of everything I'd done for them. By the time I reached my apartment, My hands were still trembling on the steering wheel, not from sadness, but from the kind of fury that only comes after years of being used. The next morning, I went to the bank. I asked to see every document related to the shared accounts. The teller hesitated, glancing nervously at the screen before saying, "Ms. Hart, I'm not sure you're authorized to access these anymore." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, not authorized?" "It's my name on the account." She turned the monitor slightly toward me. "It was changed last week. The authorization was transferred to Margaret and Thomas Hart, with power of attorney attached." My mom had forged my signature again. This time, not just to take money, but to take control. I walked out of that bank with my pulse pounding so hard I could hear it. All those years I'd told myself she'd never go that far. That deep down, she still loved me. But love doesn't steal your identity. Love doesn't erase you on paper. That night, I called my parents. My dad answered, sounding casual, like nothing had happened. "Olivia, honey, you sound upset. Can't we talk about this like adults?" "I went to the bank," I said flatly. Silence. Then a faint clink of ice in his glass. "What for?" "To see how far you'd go." Mom's voice came on the line, sugar-coated and sharp. "Olivia, don't twist this. We only did what was necessary to protect the family finances. You've been unstable lately." "Unstable?" I repeated, my laugh breaking through the anger. "You stole my money and my signature, and now you're calling me unstable?" "Sweetheart," she sighed, "you're overreacting. You're lucky we've helped you as much as we have." "Helped me?" They had drained me dry and still had the audacity to call it generosity. Lily's voice suddenly cut in on speakerphone. "Mom, Dad, just hang up. She's spiraling again." I could hear her smirking through her tone. My blood boiled. "You know what, Lily? I paid for your degree, your car, and your fancy new phone. So if anyone's spiraling, it's the family that can't function without my paycheck." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, followed by my mom's hiss, "Don't speak to your sister that way." That was it. The last crack in the illusion of family. "You know what's funny?" I said. "For people who claim I'm no longer part of this family, you've sure been living off me like parasites. But don't worry, I'll make sure the bank sees everything. The withdrawals. The forged forms. The fake authorization." My dad snapped, "You wouldn't dare." "Oh, I already did," I said, and hung up. The next day, I closed every account they had access to. Cancelled every auto payment, every insurance link, every direct deposit. Within hours, my phone started lighting up like fireworks. First my dad, then my mom, then Lily. "Olivia, the mortgage bounced." "Olivia, the car insurance lapsed. Are you crazy?" "Liv, what did you do?" Each message made me smile a little more. For the first time in my life, their emergencies weren't my responsibility. Their comfort wasn't my burden. But the satisfaction didn't last long. Because a few days later, a letter arrived at my office, an official-looking envelope stamped with my parents' address. Inside was a printed statement from my mother. It read, "We're deeply disappointed by your behavior and attitude toward this family. Effective immediately, you are no longer welcome in our home. Do not attempt to contact us or attend family functions. You've chosen this path, live with it." No signature. Just my mother's initials, MH, typed neatly at the bottom. For a second, I just stared at it. Then, slowly, I smiled. Because they thought this letter was punishment. But it was proof. Proof that they had cut me off, not the other way around. Proof that I didn't owe them anything anymore. I pinned the letter to my fridge that night. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. They'd wanted me to feel small. Forgotten. But what they didn't realize was that they had just given me something priceless, permission to stop saving people who never planned to save me. And that was the night the real plan began to take shape. Not for revenge born of anger, but for justice wrapped in calm precision. Because if they wanted to erase me, I was going to make sure the world remembered exactly what they did to me. Julia's reaction was the first time I felt something shift from pain to possibility. She didn't gaslight me or tell me to take the high road. She simply said, "We will make them account for every dollar," and I believed her because she sounded like someone who had done it before. She started by teaching me how to think like an investigator. It was oddly comforting, learning to see money as a map of behavior. We printed bank statements and highlighted every transfer that didn't line up with bills or agreed expenses. We annotated dates, matched them to texts and voicemails, and circled patterns. Tuition payments timed just after big family dinners, large withdrawals immediately followed by gifts to Lily, multiple transfers labeled vaguely as family support with no receipts. Each circled line felt less like numbers and more like fingerprints. Julia called in a favor with a forensic accountant named Marco. He was a quiet man in his 50s who wore sensible shoes and had a habit of tapping his pen against the table while thinking. Marco took one look at the spreadsheets and nodded. "People who steal from family try to hide behind generosity," he said. "But generosity has a trail. Fraud has documentation. We'll follow the money." He started tracing the wires through intermediary accounts, and within days uncovered transfers that looped through a small payments company before landing in Lily's bank. To a layperson it might look like a legitimate business expense, to Marco it looked like deliberate obfuscation. While Julia and Marco worked on the paper trail, Daniel did his part quietly. He reached out to Claire, a compliance officer at the regional bank that handled my accounts. Claire listened to the story without dramatics and then got to work. She pulled internal logs that showed not only the transfers but also the IP addresses and user agents used to authorize them. One of the logins originated from my parents' home IP. Another was timed at 2 in the morning, which made no sense until we matched it to a voicemail where my mother woke up and said, almost proudly, "Don't worry, I fixed it." Hearing my mother's voice in that recording felt like both confirmation and finality. She had said, on tape, what she believed about me, that I would remain soft, that I would not fight. Julia leaned back in her chair and said, "That voice is more than a confession. It's motive." I was suddenly doing more than documenting theft, I was building a narrative that could stand up in court. As the evidence stacked, what surprised me was how calm I became. At first it had been rage and disbelief, but methodically assembling the truth turned my anger into strategy. I stopped imagining dramatic confrontations and started planning steps: send a demand letter, file for an injunction to prevent further withdrawals, prepare for civil claims. Julia walked me through each option, and I realized she expected me to be part of the process, not just a client to be managed. She taught me to say, as clearly as possible, exactly what I wanted: repayment, restitution, and assurance that the theft would stop. People began to notice the change. A coworker mentioned, offhand, that I seemed more focused. Daniel would find me late at night with spreadsheets open and a stubborn look on my face, and he'd make coffee without asking. Even Lily texted less, as if some invisible radar warned her the game had shifted. It was subtle, but there was a new tension in every family dinner table where I wasn't invited. That tension was proof the groundwork was working. Then came the practical part of legality: subpoenas, affidavits, handwriting analysis. Marco found a handwriting analyst who compared the signatures on the cancellation forms to mine. The analyst's report was precise and damning: inconsistencies in stroke pressure, unnatural pauses, signs of tracing. It wasn't a dramatic revelation, but it was exactly the kind of steady, unemotional proof that dismantles a performance. The hardest part wasn't collecting evidence. It was accepting that the people who raised me had crossed a line they could never uncross. Even with every paper and recording, I had to prepare for the possibility that the judge might see family differently than I did. That reality forced me to ask myself what I truly wanted. Was this about punishment? About humiliation? Or about reclaiming the life I'd been bankrolling for strangers who pretended to be kin? The answer was simple and unromantic. I wanted freedom. Freedom to make choices without apologizing for prioritizing myself. Freedom to stop carrying emotional debt disguised as love. Julia wrote the demand letter with clinical precision. It listed transactions, dates, amounts, and the legal basis for repayment. It demanded restitution within 30 days and warned that if they failed to comply, we would file suit. When I signed the letter, I felt nothing theatrical. No triumphant music swelled. Instead, there was a quiet satisfaction, like closing a door on a long, exhausting argument. I mailed it the next morning. That evening, I made myself dinner and sat at my kitchen table with the lights dimmed. The house felt smaller somehow, the quiet less oppressive. Outside, the city sounded like life continuing, indifferent and honest. I realized the clarity Julia had helped me find wasn't just about money. It was about recognizing my own limits and refusing to finance someone else's indifference any longer. As the gavel struck, the sound echoed like the final note of a song that had played far too long. My mom's tears dried up instantly. She was calculating, even now, how to spin the story. My dad just sat there, staring at his hands. Lily whispered something to her lawyer, her expression unreadable. Julia placed a steady hand on my shoulder and whispered, "It's done." But it wasn't done, not yet. Because revenge, as I was learning, isn't about destruction. It's about truth taking shape so clearly that even the guilty can't hide behind denial anymore. After court, I walked past them in the hallway. My mother reached out and grabbed my wrist. "Olivia," she said softly, "you're really going to destroy your own family over a misunderstanding?" I looked down at her hand, the same hand that had signed away my savings, and said, "You destroyed it when you made me your bank account instead of your daughter." Her fingers slipped away. For the first time, I saw it, the fear behind her eyes. Not fear of me, but fear of being seen for what she truly was. A week later, they tried to call me again. Dozens of messages. Some angry, some pleading. "We were desperate," my dad said in one. "You don't understand the pressure." But I did. I understood perfectly. Because desperation doesn't justify deceit. They had 30 days to repay the court-ordered restitution. Instead, they stalled, tried appealing, even tried selling the house that was technically still under my name. Julia caught it before they could transfer ownership and filed an injunction. It froze their assets completely. When that notice arrived, Lily called me, crying this time. "Liv, please. They're going to lose everything. Just take the house. Forget the rest. You've made your point." I wanted to feel pity. But all I felt was clarity. "You said I was paranoid," I told her. "Now you can live without the burden of my paranoia, or my money." Then I hung up. 2 months later, the sheriff's sale happened. The home where I'd spent most of my life was auctioned off quietly, without ceremony. I didn't attend. Julia sent me the paperwork confirming transfer of title. My parents had moved into a small rental unit across town. Lily, apparently, dropped out of school and took a job at a cafe. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, I felt stillness. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just a long, patient silence that follows years of being ignored. The story went around the neighborhood, of course. Friends and family picked sides. Some said I was heartless. Others whispered that maybe I had been right all along. But none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was this: I had stopped funding my own mistreatment. A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper. It said, "We forgive you." I laughed, out loud, in the quiet of my kitchen. Forgive me? For what? Finally saying no? Finally standing up? I tore it in half and dropped it in the trash. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and went out onto the balcony. The city lights stretched endlessly, each one a small promise of something untainted. Julia called to check in, and I told her, "It's strange. I thought victory would feel like fireworks." She chuckled softly. "It rarely does. Real justice feels like air, you don't notice it until you can finally breathe again." She was right. I hadn't realized how much space their control had taken up inside me. Every decision I'd made for years had been shadowed by guilt, obligation, fear of losing their love. And now, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of being alone. I was free. That night, I opened a new savings account, just in my name. No joint access, no family ties. I set up automatic deposits and renamed the account Freedom Fund. It wasn't about the money. It was about promise, the promise that from now on, I'd invest only in people who saw my worth without needing to drain it. As I looked out into the dark, I realized the real revenge wasn't the court's decision or the lien or even the justice served. It was that I no longer wanted their approval. And for the first time in my life, I slept peacefully knowing they could never buy, borrow, or beg for my silence again. 6 months later, my life felt like it finally belonged to me. Seattle was gray, wet, and calm, the kind of calm that didn't feel empty but earned. I rented a small apartment overlooking the Sound, with wide windows that filled the place with soft light. No shouting. No guilt. No one asking for money disguised as help. My consulting business grew faster than I expected. Companies valued my discipline, my ability to organize chaos. Ironically, all those years of managing my family's finances had made me an expert in control. Now, that skill belonged to me. One evening, I came home after a long day and found another envelope slipped under my door. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. I stared at it for a moment, then set it on the counter without opening it. For the first time, I didn't feel curious. I didn't need to know what she wanted. Instead, I went to my balcony, poured a cup of tea, and watched the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned gold and violet, a color I'd never noticed before, because I'd never given myself the stillness to see it. People often talk about forgiveness like it's a door you open for others. But I learned it's really the one you walk through alone, leaving their shadows behind. I didn't hate them anymore. That surprised me. Hate meant they still owned space in my heart. Now, there was just distance, clean, quiet distance. Sometimes, I think about the girl I used to be, the one who thought love had to be earned through sacrifice. I wish I could tell her, "You were never hard to love. You were just surrounded by people who didn't know how." That night, I wrote myself a letter instead of reading theirs. It said, "You did the right thing. You chose peace. Keep going." I folded it, placed it in a box labeled New Beginnings, and smiled. Because for the first time, the future didn't scare me. It was mine. Revenge isn't always about payback. Sometimes, it's about peace. It's about standing up after years of being stepped on, and realizing you never needed their approval to be whole. I didn't destroy them. I simply stopped saving them. And in doing so, I saved myself. If you've ever been told you're too kind, too forgiving, or too soft, know this. Those traits aren't weaknesses. They're your strength, once you learn when to stop giving them away. Revenge isn't chaos. It's clarity. It's walking away with your dignity intact and your head held high. And if stories like mine remind you that justice can be quiet but powerful, subscribe to Revenge Echo. Because here, we don't glorify anger. We celebrate freedom.